Millions of women across the country and the world marched on January 21st.
In the afternoon, we are closing for mandatory training around unconscious bias.
She became the first senator to bring her baby to the floor during a vote.
Salesforce is holding an equality summit this month.
What we're seeing right now nationally is not a women's movement. It's a people movement. It affects all of us. Studies are shining the light on pay equity and gender equity and the long-term consequences, not just for women, but for the overall economy. Customers are demanding that diversity and inclusion become part of the fabric of society, not just a compliance box to be checked off at the end of a process. More women are running for political office than at any other time in our history. This is a groundswell, a pinnacle time in our history. It's my goal as mayor to make Columbus America's opportunity city. But to get there, to realize this vision, we have to first become America's equal opportunity city. So what are we going to do now, together, to change the story for our community?
So good morning and welcome. We thought it would be good to just start with a little bit of a video vignette of where we are as a nation, as a state, as a community. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time this morning to welcome you. This is a great representation of our community today. We, as of today, have 108 adopters of the Columbus Commitment, Achieving Pay Equity, which is amazing that in just a little over 4 months, 108 companies have raised their hand to look at their data and understand exactly where they are in the pay equity journey, and then participate in best practices learning collaboratives like this to change the story where it's necessary, and to even start with an education component of what they might be able to do in their own communities and in their own workforces and in places of employment to change the story. So here we are, 1 year later. Over the past year, we have launched the Columbus Commitment, Achieving Pay Equity. And we've had, as I mentioned, an overwhelming response. So I want to start by saying thank you to all of you. Thank you to the 108 area companies who said yes and signed the commitment. Thank you. And thank you to those companies who are joining us today to continue this journey toward pay equity. And thank you to our sponsors who have made today possible. Our presenting sponsors, AEP, the Columbus Partnership, Huntington, L Brands, Nationwide, and Ohio Health. And our supporting sponsors, Baker Hostetler, Cardinal Health, EMH&T, GBQ, and the Ohio State University Fawcett Center. I also wanted to take a moment to just recognize the elected officials who are with us today. Columbus City Council President Pro Tem Michael Stinziano, not sure if I saw him in the room, Franklin County Recorder Danny O'Connor, Franklin County Commissioner Kevin Boyce, Franklin County Commissioner Marilyn Brown, and Franklin County Clerk of Courts Lori Tyak. As promised, when we launched the Columbus Commitment, Achieving Pay Equity last November, we wanted to provide opportunities for learning, for engaging with one another, and providing tools and solutions to address the gender-based wage gap that stands at more than 20% in our community today, and the race-based wage gap that's as large as 46% in this community today. The reason for these disparities, they're multifaceted, which is why in our very first year, the Columbus Women's Commission engaged the conversation in our community around women's pay, helping to uncover the relevant data and convening conversations and best practices learning sessions, such as those that will take place today, to start to change the story. We all know that pay equity is the right thing to do. That's why you signed the commitment and came today. We also know that pay equity makes good economic sense. Pay equity has Pay inequality has significant economic consequences. Some of our research highlights that achieving equal pay in the workplace would cut the poverty rate in half for working women and their families. Inequality in pay between men and women impacts families, children, and our community. And pay equity drives community investment, making this region attractive for companies and families alike looking to relocate and invest resources in this community. So now I'd like to introduce you to 5 leaders who will be sharing with us this morning. Leaders in their respective companies and in this community. Each of them has adopted the Columbus Commitment Pledge and is passionate about the topic. Julie Nugent of Catalyst. Julie brings both a wealth of knowledge and energy to this work. Catalyst is a global nonprofit working with some of the world's most powerful CEOs and leading companies to build workplaces that work for women. Catalyst helps organizations remove barriers and drive change with pioneering research, practical tools, and proven solutions to accelerate and advance women in leadership, because progress for women is progress for everyone. We have the privilege of having Julie moderate the discussion this morning and then leading a larger session at 11 a.m. Darcy Congrove, Managing Director of GBQ Partners, where she has served for 20 years. Darcy's work to help her business clients find solutions and strategies that will help get them to their goals makes her a perfect fit for our panel conversation this morning. Darcy is the past board chair of the Women's Fund of Central Ohio, a strong partner of the Columbus Women's Commission, and a huge advocate for women and girls in our community. Dr. Michael Drake, the 15th president of The Ohio State University. Thank you for hosting the conversation today. Dr. Drake has been a leader in higher education for 4 decades. During his tenure in Columbus, the university has seen record highs in applications, graduation rates, academic excellence, diversity, and donor support. I would also note that recently, as many of you have heard, the university has undertaken a strategic plan to really recreate the workforce to be an equal workforce for women, minorities, and everybody who works and touches the university, which is really admirable. Alex Fisher, President and CEO of the Columbus Partnership. You all know Alex, the head of the Columbus Partnership, which is our civic leadership organization and counts more than 65 area CEOs as members, including 15 Fortune 1000 companies. Alex also chairs Columbus 2020, which is Columbus's public and private economic development arm. His work focuses on both civic and economic vitality for Columbus. And Mike Kaufman, CEO of Cardinal Health. I've had the honor to join Mike on several panels over the last year. I continue to learn from him in each conversation as his incredible passion for this work is a catalyst for others in this community. Mike brings honesty and transparency to the work and leads by example. He's a fierce advocate for equity, and it's an honor to have him with us this morning. We're thankful for the leadership that all of you bring to this community, and I look forward to the conversation. I'd like to now introduce Julie Nugent from Catalyst to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Welcome. Shannon, thanks so much for that introduction, and I'm happy to be here today to talk with all of you about a topic that's actually very important to me. Just thinking about gender and race-based pay equity, as well as the business case for inclusive workplaces. So I've worked at Catalyst. I'm currently Vice President of Research, and I've been with Catalyst, which is a mission-based nonprofit focusing on advancing both women in business as well as workplace inclusion. I've been there for 15 years, and I continue to be there for a number of reasons, but partly because of my just passion and commitment around these issues. And partly because, and for those of you who know me, and there's some faces in the room that I know, I have 2 tiny humans at home, girls, and I'm hopeful that they will not have to be up here on the stage when they're my age to talk about gender and race-based pay equity. I'll soon invite the esteemed panel to join me on the stage, but before doing so, I want to provide some brief context and about Catalyst's work in the space, as well as what we see on a national scale, national level. Catalyst research shows us that workplaces that work for women work for everyone. And too often, however, half of the population is left behind in business. So what we know is this is not a women's issue, it's actually a business issue. And when women succeed, businesses succeed. And we have significant evidence of this. And Catalyst has been around for nearly 60 years, working with both women and workplaces to make work environments more inclusive. We know that inclusion improves innovation, boosts corporate performance, and leads to higher employee retention. And we also know that having more and more diverse, both women and teams in leadership and on corporate boards, gives companies a competitive edge. Some research suggests certainly that companies with diverse boards are even more profitable. So this is about more than sort of those narrow dollar and cents arguments and bottom line thinking. We know that diverse workplaces with women, including women of color, enhances problem solving and provides a real competitive edge in the workplace. Diverse workplaces where women feel included and safe thrive. But too often, we hear that workplaces exclude and alienate nearly half of their workforce, and women continue to face roadblocks and barriers. And even though women make up nearly 47% of the overall workforce, doesn't always work out for women so well. While women have just as much to offer at work than their male colleagues, they're not progressing through the pipeline. And what we continue to see is a real sort of painful movement or lack of movement in the workplace when you think about advancing to senior levels. Women, especially women of color, remain painfully underrepresented in corporate America. And in fact, we have some new research that I encourage you all to check out on the emotional tax that specifically women and men of color face in the workplace. And it talks about how this emotional tax of not being able to bring your whole self to work can actually suffer kind of ill consequences in the workplace and can cause all sorts of health and other issues. So there's some real challenges that are ahead of us as leaders. And the bottom line is the needle is moving really very slowly. I speak a lot to corporate audiences and I do a lot of work all around the world. And I'll never forget, just a couple of years ago, I got a breaking news alert on my phone. I'm heading to an engagement out west. And it was, breaking news. Women now represent 4.8% of CEOs in the S&P 500, and this has increased from 4.6%. And this is breaking news. And I'm literally sitting there going, I want to kind of slam my head against the wall. And I'm really a very optimistic person, but progress this slow is really not progress at all. And so I think that we know that we can do better. Regarding the gender pay gap, we certainly know it's alive and well, despite substantial evidence that pay equity is both the smart and right thing to do. Shannon mentioned many of those reasons in her remarks. And we know that unless immediate action is taken, then it's not going to go away anytime soon. In our research looking at MBA students, so women and men, it was a longitudinal study, starting out in their careers, we found that in their first job, post-MBA, women earn almost $5,000 less than men, and obviously that gap continues to grow over time as the women progress in their workforce. So no matter what the size of the pay gap, any pay gap based on gender is wrong. And we know that women and men need to be given equal opportunities to succeed and earn equal pay for equal work. So this is just a given. And I know for all of your organizations and all of you in the room, this is something that you're committed to doing and to remedying. Gender equality and pay equity are not easy battles. Changing the status quo takes persistence, it takes tenacity, it takes courage, and it doesn't happen overnight. So I often talk with my clients about how this has to happen every day, in every meeting, in every organization, promotion by promotion, decision after decision. And it requires leadership at every single level, powered by an inclusive culture that accelerates the careers of all talent. And it does require gender partnership. We often talk a lot at Catalyst about gender partnership, working together on these issues to make change. That's how we know change is possible. Progress has been stalled for far too long, but there is real opportunity now. There's opportunity with all of us in the room, and especially in the midst of the Me Too and Time's Up movements. We know we can make a quantum leap ahead for equality in our workplaces. Catalyst works with some of the largest and most powerful companies and CEOs to make change on these exact topics. And Me Too and Time's Up have really inspired renewed calls for change in the workplace. And here's what we believe moves the needle. The best defense against sexual harassment, against policies that are not equal, against programs and efforts that do not accelerate change, is building and sustaining an inclusive workforce with zero tolerance for those types of behavior, zero tolerance for discrimination, and a strong focus on accountability, leadership support, and transparency in making the workplaces work for all talent. Business leaders and organizations have an urgent responsibility to do this, and so I know we're going to talk with the panel about some strategies that their great organizations have undertaken to really help make change. We at Catalyst help companies remove and knock down these roadblocks to both help women and men work together to create the sustained change we want to see, because we do know that progress for women is progress for everyone, and that all talent deserves to have the best opportunities in the workplace. So thank you very much, and at this point, I'm going to invite my esteemed panel to join me on the stage. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today on this very important topic of gender and race-based pay equity, and I know that your leadership and wisdom will be welcomed for everyone in the room today. So I want to just go ahead and kick off, and I'm hopeful all of you can share some just brief introductory comments to the audience, sort of where your organization is on the journey of gender and race-based pay equity, and how it has impacted you personally, kind of what's the personal aha moments you've had to date. So Mike, can we start with you? I don't think you're on.
I'll talk. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate the save there. Hi, I'm Mike Hoffman, and I've been part of Cardinal Health now 27 years, and I've been involved with diversity and inclusion my entire career. But about 10 years ago, I really jumped in deep by asking to run our gender equity initiative, or what we call WIN, Women's Initiative Network. And by jumping in, I will tell you personally that it is the most impactful thing I have ever done to develop myself as a leader. So I've had lots of experiences, all have been important, but to really change as a leader and see things differently by getting involved and running a women's initiative and immersing myself in understanding the issues that women face on a daily basis in the work environment and just in generally in the community has made me a better leader, for sure, and a better father and husband. And so for me, if you're not involved in a gender equity initiative of some time, then I think you're missing out in some ways to truly develop as a leader.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. Darcy.
We may all use this one. Thank you for having me. I am not quite at 20 years, even though that's what I think was said earlier. 20 years in June of this year at GBQ, and about 25 years in the accounting profession. GBQ is a 180-person public accounting firm that was founded here in Columbus, and we are 65 years old, and we've had a female partner in our ranks since 1986. We had one. And I think she was a groundbreaker because she actually worked part-time as a partner while she raised her kids and found a way to make all that work, and actually has won some nice awards from her university and lots of other places for being somebody who was out there in front way back when. So for about half of our time, we've had women in leadership positions. What I think we realized was that having one is a nice thing to say, right? And I think that my partners, the men, who are very well-meaning people, thought that it was a really great thing to be able to say, well, Kathy's retiring, and here's Darcy, so we still have one. And the math worked out great. And what we've learned is that in any situation, whether it's leadership or amongst our ranks anywhere, that having diversity of gender and diversity beyond that, diversity of thought, diversity of people is really important for our business. Our clients are diverse, and so it's an important thing to us. And so I know we're going to talk a lot more about that today, but I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Darcy.
great. I really have very little to say. You know, raised in the United States as I was, born in a segregated country, I didn't have the privilege of thinking of a circumstance in which there was equity. It never occurred to me that there was equity. And so my whole life I've been thinking about racial and gender equity as a normal, daily part of existing in the world. So I can't separate living from working for diversity and inclusion.
Thanks, Dr. Drake.
So maybe I'll take the angle from the Columbus Partnership, 65 CEOs versus our small staff. I can talk about them as well, but if I talk about our CEO ranks, 10 years ago we were 12 CEOs, today we're 65. And if you simply take the criteria of then versus now, and you applied it, then you would leave a number of women out of the organization. So one of the things that we've had to do is to be intentional about not fitting people into a criteria, but rather, whether they fit the criteria or not, recruiting them into our ranks. And I think intentionality in these conversations becomes very, very important. You can't just leave it to circumstance, and you can't. I can remember saying maybe a decade ago when being asked, well, how many women are a part of the 12 members of the Columbus Partnership, and saying, well, I don't choose the CEOs, but you can be intentional about whether or not you go after members in a particular way. And so that's been an evolution from our organization's standpoint.
Thanks, Alex. So you said something that I think is really critical around intentionality and intentional leadership. We often talk about how important that is when you're thinking about gender and race-based pay inequities, and as well as just in general inclusive culture. So for all of you, thinking about some success strategies that you've taken, and specifically, what are some examples of personal championing that you have done as CEOs and senior executives? And what do you think success looks like inside your organization and workplaces? Anyone can start, yeah.
You know, something that came to mind, Lori and I were on vacation in Arizona earlier this winter, and we participated in the Women's March. And that's, by the way, I've never participated in a march of any kind, and it was very interesting as we posted it on social media, the responses I got from the office and other people being surprised, and the stereotypes that come with whether you're conservative or Republican or Democrat, or, you know, all the stereotypes that come. And then you remember the power of breaking down those stereotypes by just being willing to do something as simple as walk and talk with people who may see things differently than you, or candidly may see them exactly as you do. It was a very little thing. At the end of the day, though, the conversations that it generated proved to be a very powerful thing, and it's a reminder that people are watching you all the time, and so the little things that you do sometimes count a whole lot more than the big things that you do.
Absolutely.
So I'll use Alex's example. When I arrived here, I sat in front of the cabinet, and I was actually, it was breathtaking to sit in front of the cabinet for me. I mean that in a literal sense. I would have made a gasp because I hadn't sat in front of a group of people who were less diverse in what would have probably been decades. So I didn't say anything, but it was stunning. And what we did then, actually, that first 2 or 3 weeks was change the cabinet, and we enlarged it to include certain aspects of our community that hadn't been represented. And as we included those aspects of the community that hadn't been represented, the cabinet got larger, but it also became more diverse. And so we went from 1 woman to 5 women, and then we went from no people of color, that I could see at least, to 3 that we added. And so we all of a sudden had a much more diverse and inclusive looking group of senior leaders. We also changed titles. There were people with very large jobs and tremendous amounts of responsibility, huge budgets, 9-figure budgets, who had titles that were much lower than people who had budgets that were a tenth the size. And so we did some, and that meant that women and people of color also were now represented at the senior vice president level for actually the second time in the history of the university. So that changed who we were on a daily basis in our leadership ranks.
Great.
So in our business, I think the most significant thing that we've accomplished over the last decade is really changing the conversation entirely about how we make the business attractive to women for a career, as opposed to for a while. And I think that we had, again, a very well-intentioned approach to that at one point, which was that we could offer flexible schedules and we could offer different career opportunities, and we could give people the chance to kind of craft their own place in the world so that they could stay with us as they worked through family issues and everything else that they wanted to get done in their lives. That was focused, primarily on women, as I think most of those initiatives have been historically. And I think where we are now today is starting to think about this less as a women's issue and more about just a person issue, which I think was something that was mentioned in the video this morning. But a key piece that was missing along the way in that, I think, for our business and for most businesses, was trying to figure out how you still had a career and how you could maybe slow down or how you could have a little different turn, but you could get back to a place where it could be something you could do forever, that it wasn't a place where you took a left turn and you could never come back from wherever you went. And I think we're doing a much better job of that today. We're getting a lot more focused on crafting the schedule and the opportunity and the career path that works for the individual, whether that's a female or a male, and really thinking about how that person contributes, what they want to do, and how we make that match with what we do at GBQ. And that's not a groundbreaking thing, but it's an everyday, every person, every conversation, incremental shift that it's hard to see, I think, as we come to work every morning, but it's easy to see when you look back to where we started and where we are today.
For me, I think you have to start with very vocal and authentic leadership from the top. If the CEO of the company isn't committed to diversity and inclusion and really committed to it, it just can't be words because people smell it and see it and don't participate. But if they're really serious about it, then people will prioritize it. If they're not serious about it, then people won't prioritize it. And so I think that's a really critical thing to start with. And then, tied to that, then you have to, walk the walk and you have to do things. And for me, probably I could talk about a dozen things, but probably the slating process or the hiring process is most important, because if you start out as an organization, and probably all of our organizations this way, and you can run the numbers yourself and it'll be enlightening, is that you probably, let's say you're only, I'll make it up, a third female in your organization, and 75% of the time you promote within, you're not going to make a lot of progress in your numbers if you keep promoting within a population that's not all that diverse. And so that 25% of the time you go outside, you have to be higher than the average if you're going to mathematically change the average. And so if you're not willing to hold jobs open for longer periods of time and hire firms that are good at recruiting and finding diverse people, then you're just not going to make any progress. And a lot of times people get upset at me when they talk about it because they think I'm trying to say I'm expecting people to hire a less qualified candidate. And that's absolutely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you always hire the best candidate, but sometimes you have to work harder at it and you have to set goals. It took me 1 year to hire our president of our nuclear pharmacy business. It's a huge business for us, but I waited a year until I found a female to come in that has to run that business, and she's done excellent over the last 4 or 5 years. We currently have 5 senior jobs open, and I set a goal that at a minimum, 2 to 3 of those jobs have to be filled with diverse folks, or I'm not going to look very authentic as a leader if we're not doing that. Thank goodness the first two were filled with African American males for us, and so the first 2 out of 2 so far, but we really have to focus on that and commit to keeping jobs open, doing whatever you have to do to get out there, network, and find the qualified people, because it's just too easy. You can fill the jobs really quick, but then you're not going to actually move your numbers.
Thank you all. Those are fantastic examples of true leadership. And when we think about gender and race-based pay inequity specifically, I'm curious how you all have even started those conversations. I often hear from many of my clients that it can be difficult. They're kind of afraid to do so. So do you have any specific practices that you've utilized or your teams specifically have utilized to kind of set the tone and to raise the bar on this issue?
I think one thing that we've done is, I've been talking about this for a long time, and so, you can run it as a large HR initiative, and I think that's important that you're looking at it from a top down. You're running your numbers, you're looking at them. We just recently did that, and I was very excited to see where we sit, because we're way above average on pay equity, both with diversity and with women, and I was just really proud of where we are when I saw the numbers. Actually, just yesterday, had a chance to get the update that we do. And but where it really starts is in the trenches. You need to, again, have a message as leaders to say to your hiring managers that you need to, every single year, when you're doing your raises and all of your things related to compensation, that you expect them to sit down, look at all factors involved, and make sure that there's no one on their team that isn't being paid appropriately. And it's really hard to run numbers and just do it. That's one way to do it. But there's so many factors that can affect pay equality. You might legitimately have someone that has 10 years experience versus 2, or a higher advanced degree versus someone and they should be paid more. But many times it's not there, and you need those managers to sit down, look at the data, and then go, okay, I have a female, she's really in the same job, she's 20,000 underpaid, I'm going to make a difference, and I'm going to adjust the pay, and then commit to it. So that is just something that you have to set a tone from the top on, and then stay on top of every single year if you're going to make progress.
That's great.
So I think that the thing that we've been working on the most is really understanding how do we get to the place where we don't have equity. So, we go to campus every year, we bring a dozen students in as first years, and it's really easy to have pay equity on day one. And then what happens over time is that the experiences become diverse. And I think we're having a lot of conversation internally about whether or not we are contributing to that gap by providing a different kind of experience. I think we often jump to conclusions if we all of a sudden have, and I've got somebody in the room here who does a lot of this, who jumps on a plane or jumps in the car and will go do, a quick assignment someplace. And I think we often turn to our single men as opposed to our women with children. We often turn to the people that we think can make the time. And over a lifetime or a 10-year experience or even a 5-year experience, what happens is that they actually do now have diversified skills because they've had different opportunities. And we've done that, I think, often thinking that we're doing the right thing, when the reality is we need to be engaging all of our team in understanding what the opportunities are that they want and what they can make fit, and making sure that we're not creating a situation that builds bias over time. One of the other things I think we've been talking a lot about is the book that probably lots of you read called The Confidence Code, and the difference in the way that men and women stereotypically behave in the workplace, and that women often think of work more as school, and they're waiting to be called upon, as opposed to putting their hand out there and saying, pick me. And that we then as leaders need to be really conscious of being mentors and being sponsors of those women, and pushing them to do the things that they may not be raising their hands for. They may be ready, but they may not be asking. They're waiting to be asked, right? And so we have to think about how we do that, as opposed to just saying, who wants to talk or who wants to present. We did a big series of tax law rollouts in January, and we've got this whole audience full of people in our office, clients listening to this, and I'm kind of hearing all the speakers, because there was no room for me to sit, so I was like in my office listening, and all of a sudden I realized that every speaker I'm hearing is a man. And it's like, how did this happen? And honestly, the person who organized it said we took volunteers. And that's a highlight for us, that we need to think about how we intentionally engage people and how we help them build the right opportunities and the right experiences over time.
So great, a couple things. One is that I agree with all of us that we need to, when we have the opportunity to make particular decisions that affect pay equity in a positive way to reduce those gaps. That's an important thing to do, and we have to do that on a regular and consistent basis. We're also thinking about some things we can do on a large scale basis. The industries are large. We have an interesting, a big cohort of our employees are faculty. 7,000, 3,000 are tenure track faculty, and those are very long careers. They're decades long, and there's a long run-up, and so the people who we're dealing with who are in their 50s and 60s have been in the same career track for 20 and 30 years. It's challenging to modify that as you go along. A couple things that we've done to try to help. For one, in our medical center, we have a new compensation plan that's just being unveiled, and it's a gender-neutral compensation plan. It's a merit-based compensation plan. It's a metric-based compensation plan, so you don't choose how much someone is going to get paid. You have some things that people do, and they're compensated for what they do, and it should eliminate, or certainly narrow dramatically, but eliminate gender-specific gaps because there's no gender-specific inputs, which is something that's interesting. Another that I do, I happen to be on an outside board of a company I've been working with I was working there many years before I came to Ohio, and I happen now to chair the compensation committee, interestingly. And we have a policy that we're using now that we are not allowing at our senior level, not allowing people to look at prior compensation when people are being hired to come into senior positions. Because if you started out below and were hanging back, you might be making, it's a great big job, you might be making $200,000 a year where someone else is making $300,000, and we say, great, we can give this person a 20% increase and get away with just giving a 10% increase to the other person and save money. And it turns out whether those big gaps tend to occur with women being in the lower paid positions. So the rule now is that we can't ask that. The person can volunteer it and things, but we work really hard to make sure that we decide what a job is valued at, and then recruit a person with talent to come in at that job. And if we happen to have somebody get an extra large increase, that's great. And I'll say I heard I was on a compensation committee at my prior university for the broad system, and this was the senior management, I think it was called committee, something like that. We hired senior people, and I remember very carefully a case with a colleague of mine, a friend of mine who'd been a year behind me in medical school, and he had a job, and he'd been in the system for a long time and had done very, very well. It was an extremely senior job, but he paid a loyalty tax, and so he was paid less than the market rates on the outside. So we were recruiting him. He was being moved from one campus to another, and the market rate for the job was very high. Where he was much lower than that, and there was real resistance to giving him the level of pay increase. In fact, there were rules against giving anyone who we employed that much of a percentage of pay increase to get him up to the market of the job that he was looking for. We had to work through that and make it that wasn't the case. He now out-earns all of us, I'm sure, so he's done quite well. But those kinds of things, those structural barriers are there, and we have to work hard to make sure that they don't penalize people in a subconscious way.
So at the partnership, we have 40 employees between the partnership and Columbus 2020. So we sign, very willingly and anxiously wanted to be a leader in the pay equity pledge. So you sign it, and then I kept asking our team, well, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to do the analysis? Well, of course. So let's go do the analysis. But when I was an executive of a hotel, if I wanted to do that, I could walk down the hall and talk to a whole team of HR professionals. If you're in an organization with 40 people, you don't have an HR director. Mm-hmm. You don't know how to do the analysis. So we brought some outside resource in. It was easy because it happened to be my wife, who actually knows how to do this for a living, to do that analysis. But it was, and I would even say this to Shannon, a question that I had of all the small organizations, and I see a bunch of nonprofit leaders who don't have the resource to do the analysis. And so on the one hand, the analysis seems real simple. It would seem real straightforward. But there is a technical science to doing it. There is a conversation that occurs after you do it. And it is that conversation that yields the greatest benefit. However, you've got to get started, and so a bit of an aha I had in the last 30 days related to this effort in Columbus is, how do we think about providing the right resource? Well, oh, by the way, certainly the mics on the stage have big organizations with lots of capacity that I bet they would be willing to allow the rest of us with smaller organizations to leverage. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity for expertise that could flow around Columbus in this area that's a leverage model of making sure that for other organizations who may not have that expertise that we're able to provide it.
I love that, Alex. I think the sharing and learning from others is critical. And I think when we think about this space particularly, there are many different types of organizations in the room, so that could be a real role modeling moment. So that's a great example. I want to talk for a couple of minutes about the Me Too and Time's Up movements, and specifically how that has changed the conversation around women and men in your organization, specifically related to gender equity and inclusive work culture. We often know, and I didn't share all the research because I would have been up here all day, but we know that fear is often a blocker in this space. People are concerned about, and even in pay equity, they're concerned about saying the wrong thing. What if I do the wrong thing? What's going to happen? So there's a lot of fear that just kind of baked into all of us as humans. So I'm wondering how your organizations, how have these movements changed the conversation inside your organizations? And specifically, what do you feel is a leader's role in these discussions?
Well, it's interesting that, as when I became CEO on January 1, I had my first town hall on January 17th or something like that with all the employees. And I could have spoke a lot about a lot of different things, state of the business, many different things. And I chose that the main topic for my first discussion was diversity and inclusion and the importance of it. And as part of that, I had our CHRO facilitate a discussion around that. And we got to this very question. And probably about 6 months ago when this came out, the whole Me Too movement, I got very nervous about it. And the reason I got nervous about it is because I was really afraid it was going to set back the gender equity initiatives that we've seen by decades. And if you look at just the recent data that came out a month or so ago from Lean In Institute, there's some really scary data in there, which is exactly what I feared. And I won't remember all the pieces, but it's like men are now 5 times more unlikely to take a female to a lunch or a dinner. They're 3.5 times more unlikely to go on a business trip with a female. And so that is going to set us back. It goes to the example you said earlier, where all of a sudden a male is not going to is going to have a tough, gnarly assignment where somebody can win or really learn, and they could have maybe taken a female, and they're going to go, I'm afraid to do that, so I'm just going to take my buddy that's a male because there's less likelihood that something's going to come out and I'm going to be in trouble. And I can tell you, I brought that up at my town hall. It has been both exciting and disturbing on how many emails I've gotten from male and female colleagues who have told me stories that they are absolutely afraid to travel, do anything with females, and how many females have had people that they have worked with for years that now, when they come up to them, won't give them a hug, shake their hand, are afraid to invite them to informal activities. And the only way we can stop this unintended consequence, because this is an important movement, this is something that needs to be done. So don't read me wrong that I don't think this is important. I think it's critical. But if we don't openly talk about it and let men express their fears and then help walk them through it, and women don't encourage them, this could set back gender equity initiatives decades in my mind. I was in a board meeting the other day with a company, and I was talking about it. And on this board, I'm always pushing diversity issues. And one of the CEOs on the board said, oh yeah, I'm with you on this. He says, I never now go on any lunches, dinners, or any activities. And he was thinking that was the right thing to say, and it scared me to death, because here is someone who is just not going to get as involved as they used to. And so I think the most important thing is we have to talk openly about it. It's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's scary because you might say the wrong thing, but you have to talk about it, or we could see some really unintended negative consequences.
Yeah, so I'll absolutely validate what you're saying, but I think what I was focusing on as well was that we often hear that fear is a real legitimate concern for both women and men, but absolutely validate what you're saying. And I think it is an important topic, and to Mike's point, having courageous conversations in the workplace is a critical first step, and being willing to ask questions, to raise the critical conversations, and to say things that people may not, off the top be comfortable talking about, that is critical. And getting comfortable with that is hard for humans. So it's very hard to do. But I'll turn to the rest of the panel as well.
So I applaud Mike for hitting that head on in your first roundtable or your first gathering. We do those kinds of gatherings several times a year at GBQ. We have not had one at this point where we've addressed this issue specifically to all of our team. We do have a culture where we believe, and we tell people on the first day that they join us, that we want to hear your voice. There's good and bad that comes along with that for all of you who are in leadership positions. When you tell young people you want to hear their voice, you actually do hear everything they think, and then you have to do something with it. But what has happened, I think, kind of along the way in the conversations that we've been having with one another is that all of the things that we're seeing in the news today generate conversation. People want to talk about it, and we're suddenly talking about topics that we've never discussed before. Mm-hmm. And I think the issue for each one of us as we either create that conversation intentionally or as it comes up and we have to be responsive to it, is to be ready to tell the truth. So a lot of people over the last few months have approached me and said, has this ever happened here? They want to know. And it would be great to say, no, don't worry about it, but it's not true, right? So being really honest about, yes, it has. And I'm aware of, these kinds of situations, and I'm aware of these kinds of things what were said, and I'm aware of how that made people feel. I'm aware of people who left the firm because of it. And to be able to give some of those examples, obviously without names and without enough detail that we're throwing people under the bus, I think is really important. So we have, there's a lot of things I think to be really discouraged about right now in terms of the climate that we're living in. I also think there's an immense opportunity from the marches to women running for office and all the other great things that are happening. There's immense opportunity to take advantage of that, to create conversation and to be real. And once we get all of that on the table, then to figure out what we do with it and how we problem solve on it together.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So I got a great couple of things. My career before I was here or a couple decades ago, I was a medical doctor. I was at a medical university, and I was dean of admissions there for a while. And so probably 25 years or so ago, most of the people in the class that I was admitting were women. So I imagined a medical student. If a picture of a medical student came to mind, it was a woman. And when I think back to the ones who I knew for so many decades, the women throughout, it's been a consistent, interesting thing. And the school that I happened to be at, in my class, we were about 20% women at a time, and that was more than, it's way back in the last century, but more than was the usual. And so the environment happened to have more women in training positions than flowing into leadership positions than was usual, but it became a normal thing. Here, half of our students are women, and half of our employees, maybe more, Susan, I don't know. Yeah, so more than half our employees are women. So out of my 100,000 person daily constituency, most are women. I had dinner last night with our student leaders. Our student body president is a woman. Our commencement speaker this coming Sunday is a woman. Last year's commencement speaker was a woman. I will say that's been intentional, specifically intentional on my part. We'd had men for a long time in the world, and I thought, gosh, if half of our graduates are women, they'd like to hear stories from people who were sitting like they are, where they are, and could have these pathways forward. But I asked a question last night, so I had a dinner with student leaders, which we do at this time of year, and I asked a question I'm going to ask now, just for the room, we get to participate. So the question is, do you know firsthand, meaning happened to you or someone you know closely who confided in you, of a woman who was a victim of a sexual assault of some kind while she was in college. So just think about that and raise your hand if you know somebody who this happened to, firsthand knowledge. So what I would say is that represents, and I've asked this question before, it's always that way. It's 50, 60, 70% of the audience say, well, yeah, this was me or was my roommate or whatever. It's entirely common. And so this Me Too, absolutely it's you too, because it really is an entirely common thing that happens. I spoke of college, and that's the place where, and the hands there, but if we went to the workplace, how many women have been treated in some way that's entirely inappropriate by someone in their workplace that wasn't, it was never okay. You know, it was never going to be okay. They never thought it was okay. It was entirely inappropriate. And if I asked that question, the same number of hands or more would go up because it happens all the time. So it really is time's up, I think, for this. And I think there's no excuse for it. And what we have to do is not look the other way or I'll say there's some issues that came up with women being harassed and treated poorly when the first days that I arrived here in completely unacceptable way. And I remember sitting with people and they say that's kids being kids. And I had to bite my tongue. I mean, it's a really horrible behavior and it has to stop. So I'm pleased that we're hearing about it. And I think we need to continue talking about it, as my colleagues have said, to continue talking about it and facing it because time's really up. There was never time. And finally we're at a place where people can actually talk about things and have it be time's up. I will say one other bit that I want to encourage us all. You know, we have pendulums that swing in different directions. And so momentum tends to take a pendulum too far, you know. What I don't want us to do is to worry about the pendulum getting too far, too much, and slam back. You know, we'll get to the place where we're a little bit uncomfortable, but we have to really work on making sure the time's up.
That's right.
So I think in building on this, I do think that these movements have been important to give a voice. And, you know, Michael's illustration of raising the hands, I'll take it a step further. How many people know of a woman that has been treated inappropriately in the workplace? And how many of you did something about it? Leave your hand still up. And so we've got to be uncomfortable. And I believe this movement has given a voice. And I think it's a gut check. I know that I've had my own personal lay your head on the pillow gut check that ask yourself the question, well, what have I done? When did I do it? How did I act? How did I respond? And gut checks are important. It's from moments that stop you and cause you to think and to reflect that cause you then to move forward. And so I think the movements in and of themselves have been, they're pieces of it I don't understand, maybe even pieces of it that I don't agree with. At the same time, what it's causing me to do is to stop and listen and think. And so therefore, I think these movements have been very important at this point in time to cause these kind of conversations to be provocative. And then I hope ultimately lead to action.
I'm going to just jump in for a second and then thank Alex for something too. So I mentioned at my very arrival, we had some gender behavior issues that were serious, and I was given the great privilege of taking a particular position. My position was zero tolerance, and that was easy for me to figure out. You know, zero means zero, so that was great. But I'll say that when you do that, you find yourself then kind of out there. And I want to thank Alex, particularly behind the scenes, for specific energetic support at that time, because, and I would say that everybody here can do that, that when you see something or when you see someone doing something, it's very important and very encouraging and to make sure that you support whoever he or she is in taking that stand and holding that position, and not, you know, the people say, I've got your back, you're way back. Make sure that's not too far back, because it really is appreciated, because as much confidence as someone can display when they say, we know what we're going to do, whatever, you know, you're feeling it in your tummy, and it's great to have people who are on your side to support you in those things.
Great. Well, believe it or not, we're out of time. The panel flew by, and I want to thank Darcy, Dr. Drake, Alex, and Mike for your courageous leadership, for your commentary and thoughts and advice, great advice, and just for your organizations for signing the pledge and really committing to make a change and make a difference and make workplaces more inclusive. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Julie, and to the panelists for sharing with us this morning. I think one of the takeaways that I drew from this is about being intentional, even when it's really hard. Every day, every position, every person, really being intentional about how we build cultures of equality and diversity in our community. So thank you for being willing to talk about sometimes what is hard to talk about. For those of you who have to move on in your day, thank you very much for joining us today. We'll obviously continue this conversation, and we will reconvene for those of you who are joining us and staying the whole day at 9:15.